And then finally, for this section, from linguistic diversity to plurilingual education, this guide for the development of language education policies in Europe, it promotes, as I've already said, the idea of plurilingual and intercultural education. So it's a link, as I've also already said, between the CFR and the current project. It underpins the language education policy profiles that the LPD undertakes at the request of member states, and you'll see there are already completed profiles for Armenia, Austria, Cyprus, Hungary, Ireland, Lithuania, Lombardy, Luxembourg, Norway, Poland, Sheffield, Slovak Republic, Slovenia and Valdosta, which I think is 14, and profiles are in progress for Estonia and Ukraine. Sometimes you have these profiles and they tend to arouse quite a lot of discussion and debate in the country where they're happening, but then they get fairly rapidly buried by the authorities in question. That was certainly the fate of the profile undertaken for Ireland. Others are much more serious. I mentioned in my introduction that I'd been rapporteur for the Austrian profile, and I was very impressed that the Austrian authorities were not only engaging very honestly with us, but were actually trying to respond to things we were saying to them during the process, which is about 2 years of compiling the profile. So in other words, they will talk about their system, they will provide, of course, essential factual information to guide the team that's conducting the profile, but they will also home in on the particular things that they're interested in. Now that in itself, in a number of countries, has brought together a body of information about language education that previously simply wasn't available because it had never been assembled in that way. When the self-assessment document has been completed, it will be sent to the members of the international team, who are usually 4 in number, and someone from the Secretariat. And then there will be a study visit where the team will spend a week in the country following a program of visits and contacts and so on and so forth, determined not by the Council of Europe or the team, but by the member state or the authority in the member state. And the idea of this is twofold. It's to inform the visiting expert group of strengths, but also potentially areas of concern within language education. But it's also to give the possibility of key stakeholders in language education, to give them the opportunity to interact with the team. Then the experts, I'm sorry this is terribly long, but only by going through it can I give you an idea of how it happens. Then the experts have to put together a so-called experts report. And when they've done that, they'll have to do that in one of the official languages of the Council of Europe. It will then be translated into the national language if it isn't either English or French. And then there will be a so-called round table where the expert team will go back to the country in question and present the report and engage in usually a day of discussion. And then the rapporteur has the job of putting together the final profile, which is usually an edited version of the expert's report, but with a different rhetoric, because the final profile has the status of a joint statement, if you like, on the part of the Council of Europe and the member state in question. And that whole process takes on average 2 years. And obviously in some cases it's easier to go from stage to stage than others. The Austrian self-assessment focused on 3 issues of general concern. The first was transition. how do you develop an approach to L2 education within a national system that avoids starting in primary school and then starting again in lower secondary and then starting again. And this is, of course, a universal. When I heard this from the Austrian authorities, the previous week I'd been talking to the Japan Association of College English Teachers, who'd been saying, has anyone found out how to start in primary without starting, and so on and so forth. So that was their first thing. Their second thing had to do with teacher education, because the Austrian authorities were in the process of changing the status of what had been the, what were they, pädagogische, they didn't, unlike Germany, they didn't have pädagogische Hochschule, where Hochschule means university, they had pädagogische Akademien. And they were a different status, and the staff at them had different contracts. Essentially, they had to do much more classroom work, and they weren't obliged to do research. But this was all becoming very contentious. And then I think the third thing had to do with neighbouring languages. Austria is surrounded by, I think it's got borders with 7 other states or 8 other states, and it's got linguistic minorities that have historic connections, of course, with those countries. So how can more be done to develop those languages within language education? Of course, I don't think the self-assessment said this, but to Austria's general advantage. And things that we engaged a lot on in Austria were the challenge of developing migrant learners' proficiency in the language of schooling. You know all about PISA and so on, and Austria, besides Germany, Austria and Germany have this unwelcome record of second-generation migrants performing worse than first-generation migrants in the PISA program. And so, we focused a lot of attention on that. Another thing that we focused a lot of attention on, and it was, I think, the first time within any national framework in Austria, though colleagues in Austria had been working at it themselves very hard for a number of years, was deaf education. And what that meant was that we were, in our final report, we said quite firm things about deaf education, about developing the German language proficiency of kids whose home language was another language, and so on. In the case of Austria, the profile was very different from the experts' report. Because there was a very, as I've already said, I think, there was a very close interaction that went over many months between myself as rapporteur and the various officials in the ministry who were charged with bringing this process to a conclusion. And the Austrians were themselves trying to respond to issues that had been raised even before. They weren't waiting till the end.
One more about the policy part?
Yes, please.
Was it solely about other languages taught in the schools and so on, or were there issues I see, because you have countries that are fairly new, like Slovenia and Slovakia and so on, that hadn't really had a long tradition of an established national language within their political structure. So is that part of their language policy stuff in there?
It has been in some profiles, but not those that I've been involved in. All the profiles that, the countries are listed on the handout and they were on the site. All of those profiles are available on the consulate website in English or French. So you can help yourselves to them. The one thing they don't publish is the experts' reports. And the reason for that is that, the Council of Europe always seeks to engage member states in discussion. The intention, it's very difficult to persuade the unfortunates that have to meet a visiting team that this is the case. But it's not an external assessment. But on the other hand, what's the point of getting experts from several countries together as a team and then saying to them, you may only say good things? So, to allow the experts to be soberly and proportionately critical in their report, you have to have a convention that the report is not generally published.